Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guests today are Oliver Stone. He is an award-winning American director, producer, screenwriter, and actor, and Dan Kovalik, who's a human rights lawyer, professor, and author of The Case for Palestine. Thank you to both of you for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, so I guess the first thing I want to begin with, we are discussing from Vietnam to Gaza, and I have been noticing since the genocide in Gaza that there does seem to be some connections between this and the war in Vietnam. There's some similarities, but there's also, of course, stark differences. For example, there was a draft in the Vietnam War, and obviously not that in Gaza. But what I have noticed is that both these particular conflicts have been rejected by a lot of Americans. And I guess the question I have for both of you to start with, when Gaza first began, when Israel first started attacking Gaza, the polls showed that the majority of Americans did not disagree with what Israel was doing. But over time, that started to change. And so I'm curious, at the very beginning of the Vietnam War, what was the sentiment like in the United States at the very beginning of that war? We can start with Oliver.
I think you're right. I think it's very similar. I think there was no disapproval of it. It sort of happened gradually, and built up over 64, 65. And Lyndon Johnson suddenly sent in, I think, 100,000 troops, Marines. By June of 65, it was starting. The 101st Airborne went in, I believe, and the Marines, and then it grew and grew and grew. And by 1967, when I went over as a draftee, it was about 500,000 troops. Wow! But it started with advisors, as you know, non-combat advisors from Eisenhower's time, and then Kennedy increased it to 15,000. But Kennedy, very importantly, was pulling out the first 1,000 but he wanted them out by October before the election. And that was on paper, and that was shared with a lot of people. McNamara was the secretary. In other words, some people will tell you, oh, Kennedy was contributing to the war. He could have been stronger in denying it, but he couldn't at that point because Americans would have turned on him. And the election was coming up in a year, and Barry Goldwater was the opponent, who was a hawk. So Kennedy was in a tough position, but he was definitely told his most intimate people that he was not going to make the mistake of going into a stupid war like Vietnam. This is really drives me crazy, and we put it into my friend and I, who's a researcher, Jim DiEugenio, have been hounding on this and put it out on his website, as well as in a film I did called JFK Revisited. Kennedy was not he was a cold warrior at the beginning, but over the course of those 3 years, he was definitely learning. He was seeing the problems, and I think that was one of the reasons he was killed. He was seeing through the machinery of this country, which is still around, which is creating wars. It's a deep state. And Dan Kovalik has written very extensively about it. He gets it. People who see through the mask see. I think you see. So we're talking about a magic act that's been going on, hypnosis of the American public. It goes again. It's the same thing. Oh, Israel's our ally. Sure, they're our ally. Well, go back and look at the history with Israel. Go back and look at all the things that they've done in Palestine since 2000, for example. I was there in 2003 on a documentary I shot. We interviewed all of them: Netanyahu, Shimon Peres. We interviewed Hamas. We interviewed. Sorry, I can't remember the names, but we interviewed the head of Arafat. I'm sorry. It's been so many years, it gets lost. We interviewed Arafat, and we had to get out of there real fast because the Israelis on a certain date were going into Ramallah, where we were, and we got out on the same day, barely by the skin of our teeth. We would have been stuck in there for another 30-day siege. They made life miserable for the Palestinians in the West Bank. Miserable. They couldn't go anywhere. They were always being checked. They needed papers every time they turned around. There was no free access. There was no sense of freedom. They were being watched like it is now. I mean, the same thing in Gaza. Are you kidding? In Gaza, it's 10 times worse. They're being killed outrageously, up front, killed like that. Doctors, medical people, nurses. I saw a report today. 165 doctors have been killed since the beginning of this war. 900 medical workers, 165 doctors. Come on, to get a doctor degree, you got to work at it for a long time. These are educated people. They're being killed in cold blood because they're helping the Israelis, helping the Palestinians to survive this thing, this siege, this bombing. It's the worst, most outrageous case since My Lai massacre for the American people to deal with. And they're hiding from it because it's not convenient. But I do think there is a consensus moving in the direction against Israel. People have to see it. And I think they are.
I think so too. Dan, I want to get your perspective about this as well. I know you remember this in the very beginning, not too long after October 7th, the polling showed that the majority of Americans were not against what Israel was doing. But as we saw over the course of, I would say, those first couple of months, those polls started to change. And then eventually it got to the point where we saw the more recent polling that shows that the majority of Americans have actually turned against Israel and do not see Israel in a favorable light.
Yeah, well, as Oliver said, he mentioned the My Lai massacre, which was a big turning point for Americans when they were able to see, that these atrocities were being committed in Vietnam against women and children. They're seeing the same thing in Gaza, mostly on social media, though. I think, and Oliver can correct me on this, I think that the mainstream press is much worse now than it was during Vietnam. You had 60 Minutes going to Vietnam and showing, the carnage and showing, Oliver?
I just would modify that a bit because the press, there's a bit of a myth about the press that they were just so democratic and that they were open and they were turned against the Vietnam War. That's an exaggeration. The truth was they were very slow to turn, very slow. And it was just a few journalists at first who were progressive who put out some information that was not put out. It was a big propaganda exercise. The military and CIA controlled all the information coming out of Vietnam. They had the cooperation of the South Vietnamese government. If a journalist filed, he would get kicked out of South Vietnam. It was very difficult to get the truth out. But gradually, troops started coming home. Troops were killed. Troops were wounded. Stories spread, and it took time. It took three years, and then I guess you could say institutions like the New York Times started to shift about 68. But by that time, with so much damage had already been done, half the casualties had been sustained. It was not the press or so noble here. They assigned that role to themselves in retrospect.
Yeah. Well, that's a fair point. And of course, even if I may say so, the movie Platoon that you made, which came out in the 80s, still shocked people. I mean, because they didn't know some of that stuff had happened.
I did another 2 movies about Vietnam, Born on the 4th of July, about 3 years later. And then I did Heaven and Earth in 8 years later in 1993. And that came out. Heaven and Earth is about the civilians in Vietnam. And I'm very proud of it. It's one of my best movies, but it was not watched in America because there was a bias in those years against Vietnam. It didn't change, but it has changed since Clinton in 97, but we gave them diplomatic recognition.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, what I'd like to say is that the American people generally, I think, are good people. When they see that these atrocities are happening, they respond. I mean, they reject it. And you saw that in Vietnam. You're seeing that now. And the students, again, as they were, I would say, at the forefront during the Vietnam period, they're at the forefront now with the encampments. And, but I'll just say one thing. I think, and again, Oliver, you can correct me on this, but I think that the universities response to the students is worse now during Vietnam. And I'll give at least one example from my alma mater, Columbia. I went to Columbia University School of Law. I tried to go to my campus a few weeks ago. It's locked. It never was locked. Okay. Columbia's locked it so that to prevent more encampments. And they called in the police to arrest students. The New York PD, the NYPD, was thrown out of Columbia in 1968. They were banned from campus after that. This is the first time they've allowed them back on campus. So it's a very interesting dynamic you're seeing.
Well, I'm sure it has a lot to do with the strict policies of the Trump administration. He's gone way overboard in his support of Netanyahu. We never voted for that. People who liked the possibility of his changing things from Joe Biden, who was a disaster, turning to Trump, have simply swallowed this whole concept that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism, which is such a rape of individual thought. It's just disgusting that we can't see the difference. When you're anti-Semitic, I know what anti-Semitic is. I'm half Jewish. I know what it is because it's been talked about all our life. It's when you use certain words and you have hate speech and all that. But we're talking about a different situation. This is outright thuggery. I mean, murder. And it's been condemned by every reasonable organization in the world, including the you would know the name, you're a lawyer, the Court for International whatever.
International Court of Justice, right? Absolutely.
Attention to it at all. And I mean, The Hague, other countries too. I mean, England, which is always our ally, is shocked by this, and if not officially, certainly the population is weighing the alternatives to supporting Israel. This has to stop. We should have cut off arms to Israel day one, when they started this invasion. It was already we've crossed the line. We're a barbaric country, and we have to realize that our government is out of control. They're psychos.
This is true. This is true. Well, one thing I noticed as well under Vietnam, of course, you guys mentioned the protests. There were massive protests under during the Vietnam War, massive protests during the Gaza genocide. At one point, there was a protest in D.C. where over 500,000 people showed up to that protest against Israel.
How many? I didn't hear you.
There were over 500,000 people that went to that first D.C. protest after.
When was that? Do you remember?
That was 2023, not too long after October 7th.
I was there. I went to that. Yeah, I've been to almost all those DC protests. Yeah.
Yeah, Max Blumenthal was there. I believe Macklemore spoke at that protest. Cornel West was there. Dr. Jill Stein. There was over 500,000 people. But I noticed, even looking at the Vietnam War, when these protests were happening, LBJ then was faced with an issue. Obviously, the public was rejecting this war. And LBJ, who I'm comparing to Joe Biden at this point, decided not to run for re-election. And Joe Biden decided not to run for re-election. So these are just some of the similarities that I've noticed to go along with that. Yeah. At that time, from what I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I've watched documentaries about it, but it seems like Richard Nixon, when he was running, he said that he would end the war in Vietnam. And Donald Trump, when he was running, remember, he said he was going to end all of this. He put a stop to it. So I'm just noticing so many different parallels when I compare the two, even though they're two different conflicts in general. But at the same time, it's like the public is rejecting both of them. And it's just the administrations are going along with the war machine.
A little history. I mean, Nixon did say very clearly that he had a secret plan to get out of Vietnam. He had a secret plan. Well, that plan was eventually revealed to be a bit of a fraud. No, but the Vietnamese were winning the war. They had no reason to not to continue, but they put up with a lot of bombing and a lot of talk, continual talk for years. Nixon and Kissinger drew it out for a long time, And meanwhile, Americans were being killed. But beyond that, Vietnamese were being killed. A huge amount. It's an estimate now that more likely 4 million Vietnamese were killed during that war. 4 million. That's like a Holocaust. That's a small country compared to Europe in World War II. It's a huge, huge damage to this country. And the bombing of Johnson was outrageous. It was huge. We dropped more bombs on Vietnam than all of World War II. I mean, you have to understand how crazy this became. I also want to point out, you mentioned students. They're very important. The first protests were actually in Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin, in Madison, Wisconsin. The year, I think, was 67, maybe 66. I'm sorry, I don't have it available to me right now. But my co-historian, Peter Kuznick's alma mater was Wisconsin, and he was very proud of the tradition at Wisconsin of progressivism there is in Wisconsin. So they woke up to it, and other universities followed. By the time Nixon killed those, or the National Guard killed the protesters at Kent State in Ohio, then the country went nuts. That moment, that was the big moment of the turning point. Kent State, and of course at Jackson State, a black college in the South, they killed also 4, 5, 6 demonstrators. I forgot, but it was a turning against it, and there was a strike. It was about 1970 when we invaded Cambodia. I was back 2 years in the States at that point. It was clear the Vietnam War was a disaster. It was clear from the moment Johnson said, "I'm pulling out." He didn't have faith in his own enterprise. It was his deal. It was his operation. He was responsible for it. He's pulling out. That's a clear statement of his cowardice. And Lyndon Johnson also is responsible for so much misunderstanding. Kennedy kept saying, "Let the Vietnamese find their balance. They are a developing country. It's third world. Let them find their way." And Johnson opposed that. He wanted to control the situation because if Vietnam went, Cambodia, Laos, he said Cambodia, Laos, and Thailand went. Well, the North won, but was there any domino effect in those countries? None. They remained what they were. Thailand was not threatened, nor was Indonesia, Indonesia changed anyway. There was a coup d'etat in Indonesia, but I'm going into a lot of detail here. But basically, Southeast Asia has remained, as you can see, a trading partner and a peaceful entity.
And Vietnam really destroyed Johnson's presidency. You know, he tried to make the Great Society with emphasis on social programs. And by the end, I understand he slept with a sheet over his head. He was so aggrieved by the Vietnam War, which he was controlled. The predecessor of Halliburton, it was something in Root, I forget, owned
Halliburton.
Owned Johnson, and he again, the deep state, he felt he had to stay in, but he regretted it, destroyed his presidency in the same way it destroyed Biden's presidency. The polls show that Democrats did not come out for Kamala Harris because of the genocide in Gaza. Again, as you say, a very similar dynamic to what happened to Johnson.
That was surprising. I believe it. I mean, I'd like to believe it. It sounds like that people see the difference. But
yes.
By the way, it's Brown and Root. That was the
Brown
and Root.
Brown and Root, thank you. Yes.
A fortune during that war. A fortune.
Yeah.
So did Bell Helicopter. So did they built 5,000 helicopters for Vietnam because they had to replace all the ones that got shot down. So it was a pig out, in terms of money.
And that's true now. There was just a report put out yesterday naming 60 different companies that are making a bundle on this genocide. And, Microsoft has been helping out with the genocide, for example, but that's one of many, and it does come down to money. These companies are making tons, and they're going to make tons on the reconstruction if that reconstruction ever happens. It's sick. I mean, it is very sick what's happening.
I want to mention the media because I feel like the media has been very pivotal. From what I understood, after the Vietnam War, that was the last time they showed war footage on national television. But I think what the Biden administration did not prepare for or did not expect was that during Gaza, when Israel started attacking Gaza, they totally forgot about social media. And I don't think they expected people to see those images, whether it was on X or Facebook, et cetera. TikTok was a big one. I don't think the Biden administration was prepared for the backlash that was to come. I think they were shocked that people were not supporting and backing Israel. And I'm curious your opinion about that.
You want to take that? Yeah, no, I agree. I think social media has made all the difference here. I mean, the fact that we all, every day, all day, are subjected to videos of children dead without limbs, thousands of children alone roaming this moonscape, which is pretty much what it is now, without parents. It's one of the, I mean, again, yeah, social media has changed how we view war because we can actually see it in real time. And that's why no one can claim they don't know what's happening. I mean, you know, the meme that says if you wondered what you would do as a German during the Holocaust, you know now is true. I mean, if you're not opposing this, you're complicit in it, you know.
Yeah, and that's a big problem, because America was always, we were always on the borderline. America, if you look at our history, we have a certain fascist impulse in this country that's deep and goes back a long, long way. You can tie it to some degree to the slavery movement, because there was a lot of resistance to liberation and Civil War. All these groups started to grow, and they grew through the 20th century. Ku Klux Klan, this, that. Those are basically fascist vigilante groups. So is the new right wing, whatever that is. But the neocons, which are very dangerous, they're the intellectual elite of this group, are leading this charge. They see the world in terms of power and control and domination. And that's what they're doing to all countries. I mean, whether it's Russia or whether it's China or Iran, they want to control the world, carve it up, give it American resources to prosper. Mr. Trump's policy, it's weird because he pronounces himself against war, but he doesn't seem to understand that the policy he's for, which is making America richer back again and so forth again, is going to involve a lot of antipathy and antagonism and destructiveness with countries. It's inevitable. So you're going to play along with the world and say, I'm a partner with the world, or I'm thinking only of myself, America first. I will decide who I bomb and whatnot. That's sort of, there's a dividing point. And I don't think he understands, because I don't think he's that educated in history. I don't think he understands the difference that he's going to have to, what he stands for. If he's going to stand for America first, and that means fuck the other people in the world, fuck the other countries, we're going to be fucked. We're going to be fucked. Which, we're making a lot of enemies right now in the world.
And I think, it's killing us. First of all, it's destroying our economy. All the money is going to the war machine, while social benefits are being cut. But also, I think morally, it's cutting, it has to impact us as a moral people, to see this every day and have our government be behind this, and just like in Vietnam, the war has spread. It spread from Gaza to Lebanon right away, spread to Syria, which is a complete disaster now, and obviously it spread to Iran. I mean, it's a very dangerous situation that we're facing. And of course, Israel has nuclear weapons, which the U.S. won't even admit to, and Israel won't admit to. And again, by the way, let's, just to mention Kennedy again, he tried to stop them from getting nuclear weapons. And you see what happened to him.
Yeah. And I'm not sure that they're linked, but a lot of people believe that. Netanyahu's in the White House today, smiling and nominating, as if he could nominate, but pretending he could nominate Donald to be the Nobel Prize peace winner. another Obama move, because Trump is obsessed with Obama and getting the Peace Prize, I think, because Obama got one. He was pissed off. They gave it to Obama. That was a joke. It set up a whole chain of reactions through time where other people who don't deserve it want it.
Yes. And yeah, and meanwhile you have, while Netanyahu's being rewarded with, military aid and all kinds of aid and grand applause in Congress. Today the U.S. announced it's going to sanction Francesca Albanese, the UN rapporteur. I mean, we live in an upside down world.
Upside down.
Yeah, she should get the Nobel Prize, right? I mean, it shows the depravity of our ruling class. I mean, it knows no bounds.
Yeah, they're going to sanction her for doing her job. Some of us wonder, I guess more so from my generation, because I wasn't around during that time, if Bobby Kennedy had lived, what happens with Vietnam?
Oh man, that world of difference. He was like his brother. He saw the whole situation. He'd been to South Vietnam when he was a young man in the 1950s with his brother. They knew the story. They knew what was going on in the third world. And you can't fight liberation. You can't fight change. And that America, throughout that whole period, under Dulles and Eisenhower and then Johnson, persisted in a policy of resistance to any reform in these countries. From Cuba through Indonesia, through the African countries, through the Middle Eastern countries. Reform was never, the United States backed the Mujahideen in Eastern Asia, the Mujahideen, who ended up fighting the Russians because they were fighting the Russians. And then they ended up as being a problem for everybody, terrorist organization. The United States has supported so many terrorist organizations since World War II who are fighting for our goals, not the world's goals.
And including Al Qaeda, by the way, they supported Al Qaeda. There's that great Seymour Hersh article I always point people to from 2007 called The Redirection, where he talked about that even by 2005, the U.S. was starting to arm Al Qaeda in like groups to go after countries like Syria and Iran. And we're seeing the results of that, and again, totally contrary to the will of the American people who thought we were fighting against those people, fighting against the terrorists. We are the terror, that is just the truth.
This is true. I have one more for you because I know you have a hard stop, Oliver. I know that you probably received obviously backlash in Hollywood for telling the truth about the war in Vietnam. Are you surprised at the number of actors and directors and producers that have been either fired or snubbed because they have called out the genocide in Gaza?
It's hard to say. That is a very gray matter point, because you don't know if you've been denied the job because you're a talent or because of your political position. They never tell you. It's not commercial. They always have it's not commercial is easy to say. So I think a lot of people have been, I can't say, I know that some people have definitely been on the shit list and gray listed. It's no longer blacklist, it's a gray list. Like the end of the blacklist was a gray list, if you remember correctly. That's when they went. It was the most dangerous period. They went after so many people, like Ilya Kazan, Sterling Hayden. The people who had to collaborate, because if they didn't, their career was over. So it
yeah,
didn't
and Paul
work.
Robeson, yeah, absolutely.
That was a gray list, but I'm sorry, the phone interrupted me. No, I've felt myself, I've been kind of cut out of the mainstream media completely, almost completely. But, it's just because of my criticism of this country's military policies over time. It continues in South America, Central America. And I think, as you know, I think we're supporting the wrong side in Ukraine. And Dan has written a great book about it, because he's looked back at the causes and he looks back at the history. People don't study history. They don't know how things start.
No, Gore Vidal called the USA the United States of amnesia. And that's absolutely true. And we keep repeating the same old mistakes.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much for your time. I know you have a hard stop. I think, Dan, anything you want to plan or plug before you?
Frankly, I have a haircut.
Yeah.
And I'm going to Italy, as I said to you, tomorrow. So I want to look. I want to fix my hair, I guess, before I go. But Dan has been a great fighter for the truth. I mean, constantly writing books. I wish to God you could run for office, Dan, or something, because we need people like you to be in government. That's the hardest thing, is to get into government, because they always derail you with some nonsense accusations of this or that, their morality, this, that. You know, it's very difficult to enter politics and pay the price. And the money, you need so much money to get into it. You worked in the labor unions, you know this, and it's a very dire time. I think a dangerous time for this country. It can go, it can go worse. It can get worse now. It could. God, hopefully not. But right now, you can't be more barbaric than we are in supporting this genocide and not even blinking about it, not having an attack of conscience about it. That's what's so scary. It's like we've become the Germans. We don't see it.
Yeah. No, that's right. Well, I want to just say, Oliver, of course, your movies, in truth, helped make me who I am today. The two movies really that changed my life were Salvador and Platoon. I mean, really, they blew me away. And Born on the 4th of July as well. And so I owe you a lot for helping awaken me. And a lot of Americans do feel the same way. So you deserve a lot of credit for that.
Well, if you tell me Sabrina says 25%, right? 25%, is that correct in the polling? The criticism of Gaza.
Oh, it's over 50%. It's over 50% now.
Yeah.
Over 50% have now are opposed to supporting Israel. That's an incredible thing. It's
And that's
incredible.
across political ideologies too.
I hope people don't forget, you know, because sometimes the memory goes away and then time changes. 6 months go by and they forget it.
Yes.
But people of Gaza will never forget it. For Christ's sake, to be treated like this, to be brutalized by American weapons of war too. I mean, we're supplying Israel. If we cut them off, it would be a different story tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow. Yeah. And by the way, I'm going, I'll tell you both of you, I'm going to Bogota, Colombia on Sunday for this Hague Group meeting, you know, to talk about what can be done to help Palestine. So that should be interesting anyway.
What movie did you say?
I'm going to go to Bogota, Colombia for the Hague Group meeting. It's a group of countries that want to stop this war, and they're talking about what different ways to do that. So it's being hosted by President Gustavo Petro in Bogota. So I'll be there on Monday.
The thing about it in our media.
No, isn't that incredible? No, a bunch of heads of state will be there. It'll be Francisca Albanese will be there, and you don't hear about it in the press at all. So,
thank you, Sabrina, for having us.
Thank you too. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Sabrina, and thank you, Oliver. You're the man. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Good day, everyone.
Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.